Hey class, welcome. Today we're going to talk about personality. So buckle in, unless you're not driving, then I guess there's no point in buckling in. So just, I guess, sit or stand comfort, comfortably, comfortably. Be comfortable when you sit or stand. So you are a person, right? You have this identity, and personality helps us kind of understand how we construct our identity and how we can compare other people. So one thing is what's called the self schema. So think of you, right? And you have all these things that are contributing to who you are. So for me, right, I'm a teacher, I'm a big old nerd. I love video games, right? I'm a cat dad. And all these things make up who I am. That's my self schema. All these things are contributing to who I am. Now, depending on the situation, my self concept is going to change. So I'm not always the same person in every situation. Me hanging out with my friends is going to be different than me hanging out in class or after class, right? My work friends versus my friends who I've known forever versus people who I'm meeting for the first time. I'm going to change my understanding of myself. When I walk into the class, right, I'm in charge, I'm number one. Somebody wants to speak and I interrupt them because I'm the boss. If I'm in a division meeting where I haven't been there as long, I'm gonna wait my turn. I'm gonna listen, right? I might not be as aggressive. I'm still the same person, but my understanding of myself is going to change based off the situation. That's the working self concept. Now, you're probably familiar with the idea of self esteem. You probably had a rally in like middle school where somebody was like, "You're beautiful, you're perfect," or something like that. If not, you missed out. So, self esteem is related to our sense of self because it's related to the idea of, do we feel good about ourselves, right? Do we like ourselves? Do we feel that we are good at things? That's the idea of self-efficacy, right? How do we think that we're a quality person? Now, our self-esteem can change from situation to situation. If I have a car, right, maybe it's an old car. I personally drive a 2007 Honda Accord. Love it. It's a very reliable car. I put a few 100,000 miles on it. It's probably going to be around for a few more years, right? Now, if I compare myself to somebody who has a 1997 Toyota Corolla, if that is your car, nice. But I might go, "Ooh, my car is nicer than theirs," and I might feel a little good about myself, right? But if I have a friend who has a brand new Maserati, right, I'll go, "Ooh, the depreciation on that's going to be tough," and then I'll also go, "That person is better than me. They have a nicer thing than I do," right? Our self-esteem is based off of the comparisons that we make to other people. So sometimes we make upwards comparisons. We compare ourselves to people who have more than us, right? We're single and we see all of our friends in a relationship and we go, there must be something wrong with me, right? Uh, or maybe we make downward comparisons where we compare ourselves to people who have less than us. So we're single and happy, and all of our friends are in very toxic relationships and they feel miserable, right? And we go, oh my God, look how much I have compared to these other people. So that's going to affect our self esteem. So upward comparisons, we compare ourselves to people who have more. That lowers our self esteem. Downward comparisons, we compare ourselves to people who have less than us, and that raises our self esteem. So when we're looking at personality, there are different theories of personality. So we're going to break it down into four general theories. So we have the psychoanalytic or the psychodynamic theories. These were based off of the theories of Sigmund Freud and his followers, the psychoanalyst, and later the psychodynamic theorist. And so this is looking at personality based off of our unconscious wishes and our conflict between the id, the ego, and the superego. We also have humanistic, which is based off of the idea that people are trying to be their best selves. So it's focusing on the self and its potential for growth. Then we have the social cognitive theory, which is based off of our expectations and our interactions with others. You'll see the term locus of control, which is basically the idea of how much control do you feel like you have in your life, right? If you have a greater locus of control, then you feel like you have too much control over things that you don't actually have control over. The smaller your locus of control, the less control you feel like you have in your life. We should have a locus of control somewhere in the middle where we know what we can control and we know what we can't control. Then we have trait theory, which is the one that you're probably most familiar with, which is just basically describing people based off of specific traits that they might have, right? They're outgoing, they're gregarious, they're persnickety. That's a fun word. So these are our four theories of personality. So we talked about Freud before, but we're going to touch on him a little bit more. Uh, when Freud was developing his theories, there was this illness that was taking over called hysteria. And hysteria was basically one of the first diagnosed and treated mental illnesses. It was this physical disorder. People were having all these physical symptoms, but there was nothing physical that could be seen, right? So usually you get sick, you can go, well, there's a virus or there's some bacteria, and we can treat that. But with hysteria, the cause wasn't physical, it was psychological. So we started to understand the role of the mind in our behavior and our well being. So we talked about the stages of psychosocial development, but just to review, we have the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages, and especially at these first three, we're looking at different levels of fixation, right? You don't want to get stuck at one of these stages. If you have an oral fixation, then you might want to smoke or enjoy eating candy all the time or chew gum. That would be an oral fixation. We talked about anal retentiveness and anal expulsiveness. So issues at the potty training stage could translate to personality factors later in life. And we also talked about the phallic stage and the Oedipus complex, right? So in developing your gender roles, how much do you struggle at this stage in the realization that you have to find a relationship outside of what your parents have? So one thing that I didn't mention is the idea of penis envy, which is just to give it to you real quickly, the idea that some psychological disorders in women are caused by the fact that women and or boys and girls hang out and they might see each other's genitalia, and the girls might go, "Oh no, what happened to my penis? I had one at some point, but then I lost it, and now my life is ruined." That's a perhaps unfair treatment of Freud's theory, but it's one of the earliest series that we have to kind of explain some of these gender differences, especially around the phallic stage. Somebody is going to be very mad at me for not giving a full and thorough lecture on penis envy. Well, if you complain in the comments section, I promise I'll do a full lecture on penis envy just for you. Please don't. I'm very busy. So I was a little mean about penis envy, but I won't be as mean when it comes to the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, the idea is you, the ego, are dealing with two opposing forces. The id and the superego. Now, the id is your impulsive childhood self. Have you seen a child recently? Right? They are very, very impulsive. They are the worst sometimes, but that is because they are just basing things off of instinct, right? They're basing things off of, I want to pee, I'm hungry, this is how I'm going to behave. Now, what starts to happen is you have a parent that says, hey, don't do that right now, right? Don't pee there. We have to wait to eat. We can't throw a tantrum. And that parental voice starts to get integrated. And that is the superego, this internalized parent. Now, we, our conscious selves, have to choose between the ego and the id. So I feel hungry right now, but I have to record this lecture, right? It's saying just go get some food. Super ego says you have to finish this lecture. So my conscious self is battling between these two impulses, one at the unconscious or subconscious level, which is deep within us, and then we have something at the preconscious level, which is a little bit closer to our conscious self, but still kind of deep in our minds. But the ego is choosing between these two at any given moment. You never want to be all super ego or all id. It's the ego's job to balance between the two. Carl Jung was a very interesting psychoanalyst. Freud was very much focused on the science, even though a lot of people think that Freud was very against science. Freud actually tried very hard to legitimize the field of psychoanalysis. Carl Jung was much more spiritual. He was another one of Freud's followers, but he focused on a lot of spiritual aspects of psychology. One thing is this idea of the collective unconscious. So we have our own unconscious minds, but the collective unconscious is this collection of all the unconscious material that exists throughout humanity. So if you think about how stories from different cultures seem to be similar and have similar things, right? You have the idea of a hero and some sort of antagonist, the idea of like these struggles that they have to overcome, certain colors, numbers, things like that. All this meaning, according to Jung, is contained in the collective unconscious. And through our dreams and through stories, we tap into that. Uh, Jung also talked about a variety of archetypes. We are not going to go fully into them, but the idea of like the anima and the animus, these male and female archetypes that are part of the collective unconscious, which helps us to understand why dreams can be meaningful to us and also be interpreted by other people, because the same symbols, according to Jung, mean the same thing across cultures. Now, one criticism of this is that that's not always true. Uh, think of a number that is unlucky, right? If you are American, the number that you probably thought of was 13. If you are Japanese, the number that you probably thought of was 4. Uh, different things like numbers can mean different things based off of your culture. So even things like color, right? White isn't the color that you wear at a wedding throughout the world. Some cultures wear red, right? So the so that's one of the weaknesses of the theory because there isn't this universal truth in symbolism. But it was very interesting, and if you are interested in psychology from like a very mystical and spiritual perspective, Carl Jung is a great place to start. He's written some really fun books, so highly recommend. Now, sometimes our subconscious mind will work to protect us. When our subconscious mind is trying to protect our conscious mind, that is referred to as a defense mechanism. So, we're going to talk about a few, and you'll want to know those for, if perchance you had a test coming up, like a final exam, something crazy like that. So, imagine yourself waking up on a Wednesday, maybe it's Wednesday the 26th, then you're like, oh boy, I better start working on that big project that's coming up for my class. And you go to check the instructions for the project and you notice something strange. You thought it was due in a couple days, but it's actually due on the 25th. You missed the assignment. Oh boy. Your first reaction might be, no, 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 this must be a mistake, right? Maybe you uh, close the browser window and say, no, 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 there's a mistake somewhere. There's no way that I missed the assignment, right? This is denial. Sometimes something is so stressful, the way that we react to it is by acting like it's not happening. So sometimes when we get very bad news, the first thing that we might say is, oh no, it's not that bad, right? Maybe we find out that a family member is very sick and we go, no, well, they'll get better. It's fine. It's not that big of a deal, right? Sometimes it is a big of a deal. So when we can't handle the intensity of something, sometimes we deny that it isn't happening. And that is one of our defense mechanisms. It helps us feel a little bit better because we temporarily pretend like there's nothing to worry about. Sometimes something is so stressful that we don't just pretend like it didn't happen. We just push it out of our mind so that we don't have to think about it. That's what's called repression. So maybe you recently got broken up with, right? And it's so stressful that you just are overwhelmed by those feelings. You might repress those feelings, you might repress those thoughts. If you remember when we talked about emotion, we talked about thought suppression, right? When you push things down, this is a very similar idea where you're pushing it out of your mind so that you don't have to think about it. Oh, I just realized that I have to do a lecture for my. No, not going to think about it, right? Repression. Think back to first, second, third, fourth grade when you were starting to have your first crushes. Now, think of the stereotypical example of a crush, right? A little boy has a crush on a little girl. What does that little boy do? Well, if you're thinking stereotypically, you might think that the boy pulls on one of her pigtails, or kicks sand at her, or throws a bug at her, or something like that, right? Why is it that if you have a crush on somebody, you might act mean towards them, right? Uh, the modern version of this, which I've heard happens a lot, which is hilarious once you understand. Well, it's not hilarious because it's people being terrible, but when you understand how childish of a reaction it is, you go, "Oh, that's pretty funny." But you'll see like DMs from like a guy to like a girl that they're interested in, and he'll be like, "Hey, beautiful, what's up? Hey, gorgeous, what's going on? Hey, you're so perfect. I'd love to take you out sometime." And then the woman does not respond because this man is a complete stranger. And then he's like, "Oh, you're ugly. I never liked you anyway, right?" Why, if you had all these positive feelings for somebody, would you act in the opposite way? Well, we can explain this through reaction formation. Sometimes a feeling is uncomfortable, so you act in a way that's opposite of that. I have strong romantic feelings for somebody, but in order to make those feelings less intense, I'm going to act in the opposite way. Sometimes we hate somebody so much, right? We hate them so much, but for some reason we find ourselves doing nice things for them. We'll say hi to them in the morning when we see them. If we have extra food, we might offer it to them, right? And we're like, why are we doing this? And it's because the negative emotion is so intense, our minds have us act in the opposite way so that we don't have to deal with all of that intensity. I'm so disappointed with you guys. You guys really have not been taking this semester seriously. You have, this has been the most lazy semester ever. You guys just don't care. You know, you're not having fun, you're not enjoying yourselves. Now, some of you might be going, I've actually been having a pretty good time. I've actually been trying harder this semester than any other semester. So why does Professor Thompson think that I am? Well, sometimes what might happen is you might feel a specific way, and because you feel that specific way, you might assume that other people feel that way. That is called projection. Think of, to try to remember projection, think of yourself as like an actual like projector, and you're this is how you're feeling on the inside, right? All gross, and you're projecting that on another person. This is me drawing a person, that's their arms and their weird person legs, right? That's projection. So sometimes we feel a way, and that way that we feel is unacceptable. So we assume that other people feel a certain way. So I'm a teacher. This is my job. I can't hate my job. Oh, so it's not actually me who hates my job. It's students who hate class, right? Now, I'm just to be clear, I've had a wonderful time with all of you. You are wonderful, all of you, each and every one of you. Uh, that's right, even you. Great. So that was just an example. Sometimes we might project romantic feelings on another person, right? We might have very intense feelings for another person. And what might happen is that person might not have feelings for us. But because our feelings are so intense, we might interpret the things that they're doing as showing romantic interest. So we're like, oh, we were crushing on them, and we send them a text, and then they respond back. And it's like, well, they wouldn't have responded back if they didn't also have feelings for me. Well, lots of people respond to texts that aren't romantically interested in you, but projection makes it so that the feelings that we feel are, we place a burden of them on other people. So the other day, I really have to apologize to you in specific because I got into a fight with my girlfriend, and I don't like yelling at people who I'm friends with or dating, right? Because I feel like once you yell at somebody, you can't take it back. Um, but we got into a fight, and I was still so upset about that fight that when you emailed me, I was very rude to you in the email. And the reason for that is because I couldn't be angry at my girlfriend, but it was easy for me to be angry at you. The reason for this is displacement. So sorry for emailing you and saying, per my recent email, that's one of my favorite things to write in an email. But sometimes we feel emotions towards one person. We cannot express those feelings towards that person. And so we shift it to a different person, right? Or a different object. So it could be anger, right? Maybe your boss chews you out and you want to keep your job, so you didn't say anything. But when you get on the road home, somebody cuts you off and you just lay into your horn and really give it to them, the fingers and angry things like that. It doesn't actually always have to be anger. It could be romantic interest, right? Maybe you were dating somebody who was tall and blonde haired and rode a motorcycle, right? And you happen to meet somebody else right after a breakup who is blonde, tall, and rides a motorcycle, and you take those feelings from one person and you put them on another person, right? Some of you may have experienced this where you break up with an ex and then they end up dating somebody who seems very familiar to you, right? They're taking those feelings that they had towards you and putting them somewhere else. Just so you know, all these things aren't necessarily unhealthy. They're things that our brain does in order to help us cope with emotions. Now, if any of them occur too much, then it's problematic. So, if your ex finds somebody who is similar to you, right, and they are happy as a result with this new person, they get to be happy. Just because it's an issue of displacement doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, right? This is also the reason why we rebound, right? We have all these emotions that we can't put on another person or on a specific person, so we put them on another person. That is displacement. Look, I know that I messed up on the key for the test, and some of you got a few questions wrong because the test marked it wrong, but you just need to know that that's part of life, guys. Sometimes things aren't fair. Now, that is what is referred to as rationalization, right? I don't want to admit that I made a mistake. Nobody likes admitting that they uh, have made a mistake. Even people who say that, like the feeling that you feel when you've made a mistake feels terrible. And it's supposed to, because that's how we've grown up, right? We learn to feel shame so we don't do bad things. But sometimes instead of taking the blame for something that we did, we rationalize it, right? The We see this a lot of times in society in what we call rape culture, right? Where oftentimes we don't blame the aggressor, we blame the victim, right? Well, why were they at a party if they didn't want that to happen? Why do they drink so much, right? That's not an excuse, right? If I am at a party and I pass out and somebody takes a Sharpie and writes all over my face, right? It's not my fault that somebody did that. But in society, we're like, well, you probably shouldn't have fallen asleep. You should have taken your shoes off, so we knew that, like all these dumb rationalizations that we make. We uh, this is very timely. Not sure when you're listening to this, but when you actually, if I were to record this lecture at any week in American history, this would be timely. But police brutality, right? Sometimes we will say things, or not you and me, as bright and wonderful as we are, but sometimes you'll hear people say things like, well, Why didn't they just put their hands up? Why were they resisting? Why didn't they blah 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 blah? Right? There's never any excuse for a police officer to kill an unarmed individual. There's never an excuse. If there are two of you with guns and one person with no weapons, there's no excuse. And but we make excuses because sometimes we don't feel okay with the consequences of things. So that's rationalization, right? We will, instead of just saying, no, this was wrong, we feel those intense feelings and then we give an explanation which makes us feel okay about what happened. Let's talk about sublimation. Sometimes we have desires that are socially unacceptable. I have a friend who loves having sex. She is a sex maniac, right? And she gets a lot of flack for it. People are like, you are having too much sex. But then she realized that if she had sex on camera, then she could become a popular adult film actress, right? So now people are very supportive. There are still some people who are very judgmental, but some people are very supportive of her decision to have sex with lots of people. So she's taken something that is socially unacceptable and found a more socially acceptable outlet for it. I have another friend who really enjoys hearing people's secrets, right? He loves just letting people talk about things that are very personal to him. Now, you can't just talk to random strangers for hours a day and just have them tell you their deepest, darkest secrets unless you're a therapist, right? Uh, I have another friend who really is interested in how people tick and just wants to, he just, every time he sees a person, he's like, how do you work, right? And he wants to look inside their bodies. And I'm just like, dude, you can't just get paid to cut people open and sometimes cut things out of them. That's, well, unless you're a surgeon, right? So there are ways of taking socially unacceptable impulses and then taking them and turning them into socially constructive or admirable ones, right? Jumping into danger is pretty not socially acceptable. You can't just jump into a flaming building unless you're a firefighter, right? Talking for hours about something that you're super interested in. Oh my God, people aren't going to just let you talk for hours about something that you're passionate about unless you're a professor. Ha ha, ha ha. This is my sublimation. Then we have splitting. Sometimes we see something as all good or all bad. So let's just say I recently broke up with my girlfriend, the one who I was talking about earlier. Yep, between talking about her 5 slides ago and now we have broken up. It's very sad. Now I just want you to know that I hate her. I hate her so much, right? She's the worst person in the world. Now, 3 months ago, when we first started dating, this was a very quick and very toxic relationship. Oh my God, I was, oh, so head over heels, right? She was perfect, could do no wrong. Now, sometimes what we do is we can't see that people are gray. We see them as black or white, right? We see them as completely perfect, best thing in the world, or terrible, scum of the earth, right? Uh, when we are infatuated, people are perfect. When we're breaking up with them, we tend to hate them completely, right? Now, splitting is helpful because it allows us to really enjoy things without really thinking too much about the intricacies of that person, or it allows us to really hate things to get away from things that might be dangerous or bad for us. So if you get food poisoning from your favorite fast food restaurant, your brain isn't going to go, Well, even though I got food poisoning this time, it's very unlikely that I would get food poisoning another time. That's just how statistics works. No, your brain goes, I got food poisoning. This is the worst restaurant ever. I'm never eating there ever again, right? Because your brain is trying to protect you from that thing happening again. Now, in a normal brain, we'll split for a little bit to help us deal with the situation, and then we will go to a more balanced view of the thing. But as we'll talk about with the personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, sometimes are you'll see that some people have a very hard time seeing that things can be gray. In borderline personality disorder, people see things as only all good or all bad. So at a certain point, there were some psychologists who were thinking, this psychoanalytic stuff, this psychodynamic stuff, it's a little too hoity-toity. So what started to evolve is the idea of behaviorism. Now, Albert Bandura was one of the first behaviorists, and are a couple things that he discussed that I want to focus on specific to personality. Now, in uh, to put behaviorism in a nutshell, it's the idea that yes, there are probably these subconscious forces that affect our behavior, but also sometimes you can just treat the behavior, right? So if somebody's smoking a cigarette, I can say, well, the reason why they're smoking a cigarette is because when they were 1 or 2, they had a fixation at their oral stage of psychosocial development, and because of their relationship with their parents, blah, 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 right? Or I can say, this person is smoking. How can I get them to stop smoking, right? Uh, Behaviorism is very straightforward. So when you're looking at the history of psychology, you see that psychology started to get very into the intricacies of functioning, but also you don't want to forget that the goal of a psychologist is to create change in specific behaviors, right? A person is depressed. How do we get that person to be less depressed? So behaviorism is a much more direct version of, or much more direct theory of psychology. Now, Bandura had two theories that we're going to discuss. One is the social learning theory, which is just the idea that we learn behaviors based off of who we are exposed to, right? He was famous for the Bobo doll experiment, where children watch people playing with I'm not sure if you know what a Bobo doll is, but they're these like stand-up clown dolls that if you punch them, they rock back and forth. They're very cool. Buy one for your friends. They will thank you. And the kids will play normally, but then they would see an adult play violently with the Bobo doll. And then, as you might imagine, the kids, next time they played, became more violent with the Bobo doll. So we learn behaviors by watching others. Uh, and that's back to the idea of like the self and personality. Who we are exposed to is going to affect our behaviors, right? If I grow up around people who are very racist, then I'm probably going to grow up to be a little racist. If I hang out with people who are culturally sensitive, then I'm going to grow up and learn to be culturally sensitive. Our personality and our behavior is based off of who we are exposed to. There's also the idea of reciprocal determinism. And reciprocal determinism is just the idea that our genes and our like cells interact with our environment and also choose the environment, right? Environments are going to select certain people are going to select certain environments. So let's say I wanted to join a stereotypical college fraternity, right? First of all, the uh, the personality traits in me, like maybe I'm an extrovert, maybe I enjoy drinking, right, are going to help me decide that I want to join a party frat. Now, that environment is also going to select me. If they see that Jeff Thompson is party time central, then the environment is selecting me, and I am also selecting the environment. So reciprocal determination helps us understand how our personal factors, our behavior, and our environment interact in order to help us become who we eventually become. And then finally, we have a trait theory. And one of the most common trait theories, the one that you should know, is what is called the Big Five or Ocean. So, real quick summary of the Big Five. There are a lot of words that you can use to describe somebody's personality. What was done a couple times was a statistical test called a factor analysis. What a factor analysis does is it looks at all the responses to a specific test and allows you to see which answers are related to other answers. So, for example, if I did a factor analysis on your final exam, I might find that people who scored well on one question measuring defense mechanisms also scored well on other questions about defense mechanisms. And then what I would start to see is that all the defense mechanism questions were related to one another, and all the psychological disorder questions were related to one another. And then I'd go, oh, well, this material must have been covered in one lecture. This material must have been covered in another lecture. So you form these general clusters of questions, and that allows you to see that even though we might think of certain traits as different, they're actually much more related than we originally thought. So, in this factor analysis, they were able to take all the personality traits that one might think of and narrow them down to five, the big five. The big five traits, you can remember them with the acronym Ocean. So, or no, sorry, anagram. I get anagrams and acronyms confused, and now you will too. So we have openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Ocean. So when we're talking about openness, all of these you can be high, low, or average on these scores. Openness is related to kind of your intellectual curiosity, your interest in the ideas of others, or your interest in trying new things. If I was at a restaurant with somebody who was high on openness, they would be the person who scours the menu for something that they've never tried before. Somebody who's low on openness would be the person who knows what they always order, and they're like, I'm ordering that. I know that I like that. Then we have conscientiousness, which is your tendency to be organized and dependable. So I have my students who have like seven different calendars, two on their phones, one like calendar book in their car, or in their bag, and then three different calendars or appointment scheduling things, right? Those are the super conscientious people. Then I have the students who like turn in a homework assignment with like several stains that I don't even want to ask what they are, but they seem weird, and that would be low on conscientiousness, right? Then we have extroversion. So you might have heard of extroverts and introverts. Extroverts tend to be more outgoing. They're the people who are like, I'm organizing a party. There are 20 people in my life right now who I wish I knew better. And I'm going to just invite them all over. We're going to do a little meet and greet, and we're just going to expand our friendship network. The introvert is like, no, I'm not going to do that, right? Introverts tend to be more solitary and more reserved. Their idea of a fun night would be like maybe hanging out with one or two friends, right? Or just staying home and playing video games or reading a book, right? That's extroversion. Then we have agreeableness, how trusting and helpful you are, how willing you are to kind of go with what other people want. So when it comes to all of your friends picking a restaurant to go eat at, uh, you have the one friend who's like, guys, whatever you pick is fine. That would be high agreeableness. The person with low agreeableness is the person who's like, yeah, I had Taco Bell like 2 weeks ago. We're not going to Taco Bell. It's like, but everyone else wants Taco Bell. It's like, I bet I had it 2 weeks ago. Then we have neuroticism, which is your predisposition to psychological stress. These people tend to be more anxious, right? Things tend to be a bigger deal more easily. So you have the person who on the Taco Bell run is like, what if we don't get the correct number of sauces, right? Everybody needs to tell me exactly how many sauces we need because, like, what would happen? Like, I don't want to have to use Diablo sauce just because somebody had my hot sauce. And then you have the people who are low on neuroticism who aren't worried about that at all. They're like, whatever, right? And those are the big five. But how do we measure personality, Professor Thompson? How do we do that? I don't know what accent that is. If it is racist, I apologize. I don't even know what type of person that would be. What? Who talks like this? I think is that Uncle Iroh from Avatar? Nephew. No, it's not, but it's close. So the by the way, if you haven't watched Avatar, The Last Airbender, 3 seasons on Netflix right now. Hopefully, we live in a world where it continues to be on Netflix for the rest of our lives. So even if you're listening to this in the year 2032 and you haven't watched Avatar: The Last Airbender yet, you can still watch it. Go ahead. So when we're measuring personality, we can either do an objective test or a projective test. Or you can just stop this video real quick and watch 3 seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's a good show. So, an objective test is what most people think of when it comes to personality. So, they ask you a whole bunch of questions, and then based off of how you responded to that question, you will be sorted into a category. So the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, is one of the most commonly used personality tests in a clinical sense. Or you can also think of the Pottermore sorting hat, right? Ask you a whole bunch of questions and it sorts you into one of four categories. Are you a Gryffindor? Are you a Slytherin? Are you a Ravenclaw? Or are you the dumb one? I'm sorry, Hufflepuffs, but I don't like you. Just kidding. You're all Hufflepuffs are bundles of love and joy. And it shows how terrible I am as a person where I find that threatening. So that's all me. That's not you. But a lot of you might have taken the Myers Briggs. So you might be an I. I'm trying to write Myers Briggs while remembering the letters, INTJ or something like that, right? That is another objective test of personality. Fun fact, not a great test of personality. It's very much more pop psychology than actual hard science, but it's fun. It's like astrology for psych nerds. So those would be objective tests. Now, there are also projective tests. Now, based off of our own experiences, we're going to see things and we're going to read into things that might not necessarily be there. When you see projective, you should think of projection, right? We're taking our own feelings and then we're going to put them on a neutral subject. And based off of our perceptions and interpretations, other people can learn and interpret things about us. So, some projective tests are things like the thematic apperception test, the Rorschach or the inkblot test, and the house tree person. So here we have some examples of objective test, right? We have all these great houses like Gryffindor and Ravenclaw and Slytherin and the other one. Just kidding, Hufflepuffs are great. And here's an example of the MMPI-2. It will ask you questions like, I like mechanics magazines, true or false? I have a good appetite, true or false? I wake up fresh and rested most mornings, true or false, right? By answering these questions, and I believe that there are 567 of these, by answering these questions, it can sort you and rate you on different personality scales. So objective tests, they ask you questions and they sort you into predetermined categories. Some of my best friends are Hufflepuffs, just just so you know. So I just want you to, first of all, ignore this ink blot. Just what you see might be different than what I see, but ignore that ink blot for a second. Look at this scene and tell me what you see. What do you think is happening in this scene? Make up a little story. Pause the video, think about it, and when you're ready to hear me talk some more, unpause the video. I'm sorry that I was ignoring you, Cisco. I just have to do these lectures. You know that it's the end of the semester, and I have to record these lectures. Oh no, I'm still recording. This is embarrassing.